And so the whole reason why we have SELPA certification is because there are 3 reports specific to students with disabilities, and those reports contained information regarding to the discipline and removal of students. And some of that is count for students with disabilities removed to interim alternative educational setting, count of students with disabilities unilaterally removed by school personnel, count of students with disabilities suspended or expelled, and the duration of the disciplinary action, the unduplicated count of students with disabilities subjected to any kind of disciplinary removal, and the total number of times students with disability were subjected to um, any kind of disciplinary removal. And this information is specifically needed for IDEA, the Individuals with Disability Education Act. Um, so Kyron has this slide that he created, and it's a good visual tool because it shows you the relationships between the reports. Um, all the reports read are aggregate reports or have aggregate counts that must be certified, and they have to be viewed. Functionality means you have to visually confirm these reports. These aggregate counts are the data, they are the product of all your hard work. This is what's reported and used um, by the state and then eventually the federal government. But you cannot reconcile those reports without using the supporting reports. So the supporting reports are the blue ones. Um, and you can see the title of the reports and you can see how they're linked. So um, I want to go to the bottom right corner. And then you have you have report 7.17 unilateral removals for students with disabilities count, and 7.16 incident removals for students with disabilities. To drill down to make sure that the data is correct, you would have to use 7.18 for both of those reports. That's the incident removals for students with disabilities list. And the lists are provide greater detail. We may have included some of those, but generally there's so many aggregate reports, we wanted to focus on those. But the student list reports, you can see 7.14 is a student list report, 7.112 is a student list report. That provides you the detail and which you can use to reconcile. So if you need to find out why your suspension count is higher than what you expected, first you would try to identify where you see that a school had more than you expected. Then you would look and see the students in the student list report. Um, so you can just step by step look at the detail. So report 1.21 is your cumulative enrollment report. And what we're highlighting on this screenshot is the difference between adjusted cumulative enrollment and the default cumulative enrollment. The default cumulative enrollment is used when we talk about rate, like truancy rate, suspension rate, chronic absenteeism rate. They're going to use the default count. The adjusted cumulative enrollment, of course, is those students that were enrolled at any point in time, even if it's an error. So if a student's enrollment continues from this year until next year, you don't exit that student until July because they're still in summer school, or August. That student will be included in your cumulative enrollment for the next year because they have that enrollment open in after 7/1, where the adjusted cumulative enrollment will only include those students whose start date begins after 7/1 or on 7/1. And then this reporting, the not supporting report, but report 1.22 graduates and completers goes with the cumulative enrollment. It's your 1-year graduate and completer count. Several years ago, when we moved the graduate reporting to the end of year, we didn't have a report to represent what was lost in fall 1. And so they've added 3 new columns. So now you can have a visual report that produces if their graduates and completers met UC CSU requirements, if they have the Golden State Seal of Merit, and then graduates with the syllabi literacy. Previously, I think last year, I think maybe the year before too, you would have to use an extract and create your own report using Excel or something. Now, this has been included into this report. And that's what we had with Fall 1. Report 1.23, graduates and completer student lists. This is the detail report. This is where you're going to be able to identify the students reported in 1.22. And the exit reason code and the completion status here should give you an indication of who is considered a graduate or a completer. Then we have report 2.16, EL status. ELs reclassified. And this just features the students who are reclassified during this reporting period, 7/1 to 6/30. There's a nuance when you're trying to reconcile your RFEP counts, is the student and the RFEP status date, the RFEP status date has to fall into an enrollment period. So sometimes students who are matriculating from 8th to 9th may have a status date over the summer. That summer status should be reported the following year by the gaining school or within the enrollment period of the school that's losing the student. It can't just be floating out in a period of no enrollment. Sometimes that leads to a discrepancy in these counts. So that's something to look forward. If you do find that your counts are a little bit off. 2.17 EL status, ELs reclassified RFEP student list. Again, the supporting report. Here you can examine the student's name, the status date, which school has the RFEP record. And then report 5.4 homeless students enrolled. Again, this is just identifying the count of students who have been reported homeless, and then the primary residency code that was reported to describe their situation of homelessness. And so just a prompt is, will the same students reported in Fall 1 as homeless be included in end of year? And if yes, why? If no, why? And then how would you determine that? Well, you got to remember that the homeless count for Fall 1 is only centered around Census Day. So just those students who have a homeless record prior to Census Day are reported in Fall 1. Any student that unfortunately had experienced homelessness after Census Day will be included, or before will be included at end of year. So yes, the same students in Fall 1 will be included in your count, but that's not conversely true. The students that your count could be a little bit higher, it should never be lower than Fall 1 for your homeless count. And then you would do a comparison. You would look at the student list report. If the counts are not the same, you'd look at report 1.18, and then I think it's 5.5 for the student list for the homeless report. And you do a comparison, identify which program record and their dates. You could probably filter the program record for dates that fell after Census Day and find your complete list of students who weren't on Fall 1. So we have report 7.10 incident count. So it's a little bit confusing because the emphasis is on incidents and not the results. And when we think of student discipline, we usually think of the results, the suspension, the expulsions, so on and so forth. So while 7.10 has the results listed, and you can see incidents involving suspension 100 and in-school suspension 110, or expulsions, other means of correction, or no action, so on and so forth. The emphasis is on the count of incidents, not the count of results. So that's something that, to be aware of when you're looking at this report. And then incident result count. This is just a count of total incident results. You don't have the breakdown where you had in the previous report of the different type of results. And then report 7.12 is an incident result student list. And this list, each student and the different results they had. So if a student had multiple results for a single incident, those multiple results will be listed. If a student was involved in multiple incidents and has multiple results, maybe one for each incident, or maybe a combination of one for an incident and two for another, all those results will be reported. And then you have 7.13 student offense count by offense. So again, the offense code is listed and the number of offenses committed using that offense code. And if a weapon was used, and then you have the student list. So again, just like the results, students may have committed multiple offenses. In a single incident, they may have committed multiple offenses in multiple incidences. All these offenses are listed. And then, of course, that information is used to produce the incident results, persistently dangerous expulsions. And so you have the different offenses used to determine if a school is at risk of being persistently dangerous. These are the more violent codes. If you were to look them up, 503, 103, 500. And if you have such a high number of them compared to your enrollment, that school would be considered an at-risk school for being persistently dangerous. And then incidents of restraint, seclusions, and removals for students with disability. Again, this is explaining why your students with disabilities, or not explaining, but illustrating how many of your students with disabilities, or how often your students with disabilities were in an incident of restraint or seclusion or removal. And then unilateral removals for students with disabilities count for the kind of discipline-related removals for your students with disabilities. And then incident removals for students with disabilities student list. Just the detailed list of the different kind of removals for your students. Of course, this is exclusive to those students with disabilities. 7.16, 17, and 18, of course, you want to have that provided to your special education system data coordinator, and perhaps your SELPA would want these reports as well. So just another prompt, kind of make you think, how do you find the number of suspensions? What reports would you look at? What information is readily available? Does it require some manipulation or a process? So if we're talking about CalPADS, you're often going to talk about data manipulation and a process. But so you'd want to look at your reports and be familiar with them. And you see you have report 7.110 incident count, which you don't see, although you have your count of your different incidents, you don't have a count of suspension in-house. These are the results, but it's the count of the incidents, right? And it's how many incidents had a suspension or in-house suspension. It's not saying how many suspensions were doled out during that incident. If it involved multiple students, this count of students unduplicated may be off, right? Or it may not be exactly clear one-to-one what you're looking for. So then you have incident result count. Check the time. You have your incident result counts. This has the results, but it doesn't identify the suspensions, expulsions, the modifications, or the no action taken. So this isn't exactly helpful. So then you'd have to look at this incident student list, and it's going to be probably your greatest or your biggest report, because it's going to list each student and each incident. A student may be repeated, but at least if you extract this report in Excel format, you can filter on incident results. And then when you're filtering, you can look for just in-school suspensions or out-of-school suspensions. You essentially could have filtered for the code, and that's what you can use to answer that question. So if you're trying to identify how many number of suspensions, that happened, regardless if a student had multiple suspensions, you're not looking at how many students were suspended, but the number of suspensions. this would probably be the report for you. And so being familiar with the different reports, knowing that you can extract them in different formats would help you greatly. And often, we use that as an example because it's this time of year, closer to August, when you get your data files from the CDE, people want to know how many suspensions they had. Well, there's not a report. The question is, what report will tell me how many suspensions I had? Right? There's not a one-for-one. There's not a report that's going to say you had 15, 20 suspensions this year. You have to know what report lists those suspensions and be able to filter. And then, of course, 8.1 student profile list. It's a cumulative enrollment version of report 8.1. So you see one version for fall 1. It's all the students who were enrolled on census date. Well, this one is for all students who were enrolled during the academic year. And 8.1 is the largest report that we have. So if you were going to produce a report for your administration with student details on it, 8.1 may be the report that you opt for. And then you have your 14.1 student absenteeism count. This is your STAS data. What's of significant importance is on the right, you can see your different buckets, and you have your students who were absent 5% or less, 5 to 10%, and then the last two columns, 10 to 20% and 20% of the time, or greater than 20% of the time. The last two columns, or the last four columns, because there's two columns for each, the number of students and the percentage of time, those are your students who are chronically absent. So those are the students who are going to be identified as chronically absent. In the middle of the report, you see the number of students with exemptions. And so you can really probably identify if you're reporting your stats correctly by how many students you've exempted. If you're exempting students in the correct scenario, or if you're following the correct business rules. And then 14.2 student absent student list. We've highlighted the last two columns. Of course, this is a student list, so it's going to feature the student status record, demographic information, of course, and enrollment information. But the last two columns identifies the students in red. That column says this student has missed 10% or more of their curriculum or instruction, so they're chronically absent. But then enrolled in less than 30 days, I mean, although we're identifying students who are chronically absent, if they show up as enrolled less than 30 days, they're not going to be counted on the dashboard. They're not going to hold that against your LEA because it was a short period of enrollment.